Welcome, and we are live tonight on March 11th, 2024. And I'm joined with John Gold, who's a longtime researcher. I used to know him way back in the day because Luke of wearechange.org used to basically use John to get all his good questions because he back in the day when he first started We Are Change, Luke Rudkowski would go around and like confront all these people and give them questions and stuff. And John Gold was like the dude basically like supplying Luke with all the intel and research and stuff. So that's how I knew about John. And then John introduced. John has a guest that he just brought on, some people that he knows because he's such an old school, hardcore researcher. We got Mike Berger on today, and Mike Berger is the founder of 911truth.org, right?
No.
Mike Berger. First off, I asked Mike to be on tonight because you had mentioned you wanted to talk about the black boxes, and I always like to go to the best when it comes to information and such. And Mike pretty much started that whole thing with the black boxes being found, with them getting notoriety or some news attention. So that's why I wanted to bring him on, as well as the fact that he knows a little bit more about it than I do. All I ever really did with regards to the black boxes is I managed to get an interview with Dave Lindorf to talk about the black boxes. He's somebody who wrote an article for Counterpunch that talked about how he had a source at the NTSB who said that indeed all four of the black boxes were found. I was at an event. He was there. I interviewed him. And do you remember Rob Balsamo? Is that his name?
Balsamo, right?
He bugged the shit out of me to use my footage to put into a film that had an argument about 9/11.
He was a pilot or something, right? And
he founded 9/11 pilots for 9/11.
Yeah, pilots for 9/11 Truth. And I didn't want him to use it. I just said no, and then he came after me a little bit, whatever. But I don't want even to talk about that.
There's so much drama, and then they made like all this ridiculous stuff to be like out, like it was popular, and then and then basically shut down the a lot of the real arguments. They divided it a lot from the inside, and it's just it's crazy what's happened over all the years. And
so I would just to clarify, I was not the founder of 911truth.org. I came on about a year and a half later, but I did become the media coordinator 2 weeks right before Charlie Sheen went public on Alex Jones' radio show. And I wound up on Showtime Tonight. And then I had about 3 more television interviews.
Do you remember how good the Showtime or Showbiz Tonight?
Showbiz Tonight. That was what it was, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's a story.
They probably tried to make you look like crazy, and
no, they were actually fairly.
They were fair.
Well, that one was weird. I got to talk to the producer before when they called to ask somebody from our organization to go on. And I just asked the guy, I said, do you know anything about 9/11? He goes, absolutely not. And I said, can I just give you like 5 quick things to check and just confirm these for yourselves? We're not crazy. This is for real. And that was why we got a really nice reception, because he was open to it. They got such a big response and such a big audience from that. After the show, he contacted us and he said, hey, can you put us in touch with other people? We want to keep going. So we had given him a list of other people. And the next day, they didn't talk about 9/11. And when I called to find out why, they had pulled him from the show.
Yeah, it's crazy how it's like they blacklisted it once they realized, the potential of what will happen once people start realizing the truth and stuff.
And yet that was, commercial television where they make money from getting eyeballs, and they didn't want eyeballs.
Right. They didn't want eyeballs on it. Someone paid them more than the advertisers to get it off the air. So
anyway, let's just say real fast, the 9/11 report says that none of the CVRs oh my God, the
just to forgive my ignorance in the introduction, before will you regain
Oh,
your thoughts? Who is the founder, and who did you take? You took it over about a year after him. 9/11
No,
D.
911truth.org. There was an original steering committee, which was the first executive director was David Kubiak. Janice Matthews, who eventually became the executive director, was the person who first herded the cats in the 9/11 Truth Forum before there was a 9/11truth.org. Then she became his right hand. There was a very formal, actually, group of people in the very beginning, names people would recognize, who have since distanced themselves from 9/11truth.org. But there were some movers and shakers, one of whom was Catherine Austin Fitts, who never distanced herself from the issue. She was there in the original group. I was not. I was asked by Janice when she became the executive director to be the media person. And this was going into, actually, well, that was before we actually did our gigantic conference in Chicago in 2006, where we had 500 people. The New York Times sent a journalist to the conference who stayed for the entire weekend. And I mean, he wrote a fair article, but he met and published and popularized some pretty wild, far out people who were in the group. Like a guy named Hamuk, who at the time talked to him about living in a cave. So those are the kind of people that they put out in front to represent the truthers. But John's actually been at this longer than I have been. So
Yeah, I remember.
I don't know about that. I mean, the thing that really got me started in January, January 2002, when it was reported that Bush and Cheney asked Tom Daschle to, quote, limit the scope, according to CNN, of the investigations, when they actually asked him not to investigate the attacks at all.
Was that before or after he was sent anthrax? That was
After he was sent in. No, what?
Yeah, it was after he got the anthrax in the beginning. The anthrax came very close to 9/11.
Yeah, so first they like threatened him with Al Qaeda, and then he pushed the issue, and Cheney was like, "No."
Well, anyway, that's what got me
investigate this, or what I was doing in that bunker.
That's what got me interested, and then what got me off to the races was the release of the August 6th PDB, or news of the August 6th PDB, that Bush got a warning. Because if you remember, we were told repeatedly there were no warnings. Nobody had any idea that this was going to happen. It was a complete surprise attack, a new Pearl Harbor. And, you know, we heard that repeatedly on the news. And then, oh my God, they did get a warning. I was off to the races. I was furious. And that's the same thing that actually got Paul Thompson started. So I don't know exactly if I've been doing this longer than you, or
you've been doing it longer. I went down the rabbit hole a year later in March of 2003 when I saw people online in a forum claiming there were people who must have had foreknowledge because they made bets on the financial markets. And at the time, the Chicago Board of Options Exchange put their data and charts online for free. So I just started going through the data to disprove what they were saying, because I thought they were nuts. And not only were they not nuts, it just kept expanding. And then I, started to find articles about the hijackers, and I just kept digging. And then very quickly, I also noticed articles would disappear. In the early days of the internet, you'd see something one day in a mainstream like newspaper online, the next day it's gone. So like Paul Thompson and other people, I started saving those articles and documents, because I knew in this day and age, this stuff's going to disappear. And like now,
there was a whole link library and archive that somebody had made. I remember it was on, I think it was the old Killtown website.
Yes.
Yeah, he had this huge archive of all the like links that they took down and all the sources where it was like them contradicting themselves, and they just like they literally like edited and erased history like straight out of Orwell. Something like how they just eliminated certain things from the record. And
as far as revising history, how did everybody like it when Ellen had George W. Bush on her show, promote his book, that Keith Olbermann said that he owed Bush an apology they were revising history and putting him on a pedestal as opposed to Trump at the time. What did you think about that? I mean, I was furious, but how did you take that revising of history? That he was now on a pedestal. He was a good guy.
Well, the whole way they framed it in the media and the whole way that they got away with it for so long, now they don't even talk about it, which is even more revealing because it's they can't even touch the issue because there's so many people that will just raise questions and stuff. It's yeah, there's so much of the history that people, and the fact that people are like starting to lose faith in a lot of the history that we're taught, because you see like I read 9/11 and what it says about it in the history book, and I compare that to the research that I've done, and I say, like, oh my God, this is how it's done. This is how it's just washed.
Exactly. This is how it's done. And they rely on the passage of time, the deaths of individuals we would want to question, in order to keep their story going.
Remember, there's this guy, even Graham Hancock, who's saying like
Yes.
ancient theories about the pyramids. Maybe they weren't, like going against the Egyptologists and stuff, and saying that maybe these kings came along because we don't find hieroglyphics or any of the same kind of stuff. It's just maybe it was these things were built by different people and for different purposes, and they block these guys and they call them quacks, and they write all these articles and hit pieces against them the same way. They don't want anybody questioning history and the official dumb.
But we've literally had a chance to watch history revisionism in real time, like over the last 24 years, 23 years, 24 years.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's why I think it's important to get you brought Mike and to have you on to document all this for the record, because there's so much disinformation out there, and yeah, so much damage that's been done to the
Well, the damage was done multiple ways to the 9/11 truth movement, if that's what you were going to say, to the cause. I mean, the damage was done years ago.
yeah, there was a lot of damage done on all sides, and then some by people just that I knew, like, that were good intention, that got misled and led down different weird research paths that just got them all messed up and stuff. So that was like where I was like trying to combat a lot of the disinformation and make videos where it's like, hey, I have a science degree and we can use science to debunk the bad theories. That's probably that molten hot orange stuff pouring out the side of the towers is probably not molten aluminum.
Well, or there's a firefighter chief with a cameraman showing that weeks and weeks after the attacks, they're standing on the pile, and he's like, don't spray water on it. It's like a molten oven inside, and you see the glowing under the pile too. Weeks later. So there's no debate it's not aluminum, and nothing in those planes could have kept the fire going for months underground.
It was months later.
Right.
The last fire was put out on December 19th.
Yeah. So what burned for 3 months under a pile of rubble?
Yeah. And they actually, World Trade Center 7 was the first to be excavated. Yep. And if you look, Pyrocool FEF, it used to be on their website. I don't know if it still is, but if you go to their website, it used to brag that it was used to clean up the World Trade Center pile. And you could look up the records. They bought like 2,000 gallons of the stuff that mixes at like 0.04%. I did the calculation. It makes like 500,000 gallons. It would mix with 500,000 gallons of water, basically. Wow. And that's how much they sprayed on that pile, and fires were still burning underground 3 months later. That's ridiculous. Yeah. And all that stuff, by the way, has PFAS in it. It's all that stuff is like loaded with like forever chemicals.
Well, right. Before this gets into a buildings discussion, I want to read the quote from the 9/11 report about the black boxes. It says, quote,
sorry, I had to get it in, John.
That's all right.
Go for it. Let's do the
PDRs and FDRs, flight data recorders, they're the black boxes, from American 11 and United 175 were not found. And that was page 456, footnote 76 of the 9/11 report. So, Mike, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, one of the fascinating points about this is that they had the balls to put that in a footnote in the report that came out in 2004, when there was already a book published a year earlier. And the person, Nicholas DeMasi, who was a firefighter telling the story, had no idea the government was ever going to pretend they didn't find the black boxes, because he took the federal agents, FBI, around the site in an ATV. And he describes it in this book very matter-of-factly. And so it was very strange. And I know that Mike Balone and Nick DeMasi had contacted the commissioners to testify. They had never been called. Nobody ever contacted them from the government. And then after the fact, like John was pointing out, there have been plenty of people to attack, like, for example, Mike Balone's credibility. And I've always wondered what the logic was in this. How could these two men have known that the government was going to claim the things they found were never found? That's just an absurd, kind of twisted way to try to backdoor their credibility, when the timeline, pretty much, as John would say, speaks for itself. This thing was already published and in the stores before the commission report came out, and basically called this firefighter a liar.
Right. And there was a document that came out on September 18th, 2001, from the New York State Disaster Preparedness Commission Incident Action Plan, World Trade Center disaster. And in that document, it said, quote, investigators have identified the signal from one of the black boxes in the WTC debris. So that's the first indication that the black boxes were there. They weren't completely destroyed, or at least one of them was.
Right.
If you could share a screen, man, with that document, that would be awesome. Or at least maybe post a link in the private chat so I can share it. It might not let you post it on my channel, but I can certainly post it on my channel.
Got it here. There you go. That should be it, I hope.
All right, I'm going to copy that link and post it right here for people so that they can get those documents. Right there is the link, guys. I posted it right there in the live chat so people can go and back this up, that John is not making this up and not pretending.
Right. And also, I don't know exactly when this came out, but there's another document. I think this might have come out in 2005. Give me a second. It's going through archive. AMC accelerating. I can't even read the document. Accelerating the pace of transformation. And in that document, it said, quote, radio frequency detectors developed at CE-COM were used to find, quote, black box flight recorders from the airliners that crashed into the two towers. So right now, it sounds from that statement that they were able to find the black boxes using the equipment they stated. So again, another indication that the black boxes were there. And I'll give you the link for that. And it's funny, I posted this to Twitter today, and that's all I'm doing right now is going to Twitter and getting the links that I posted.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's what I do too. Sometimes it's just I unload everything on Twitter. I get a bunch of tabs open and I just do a stream and just go over all that good stuff. That's a good way to do it.
I just gave you the second link to the second article. So Mike, why don't you go from here? Because
sure. So I first interviewed Nicholas DeMasi, I think it was about October of 2004, over the phone. And I asked him what was the largest piece of debris that he found. He said the largest piece of plane wreckage was 8 feet by 11 foot. It was a fuselage. There were also many seats recovered. And then he told me that when he went to his chief, at that time, the chiefs were the people in charge of the firefighters who were trying to locate and recover fellow firefighters' remains. that he asked the chief, where do we put this stuff from the planes? Don't they rebuild them like they do in all air disasters? And the chief said, put it on the rubbish pile. They know, quote, they know what happened, which Damasi thought was very questionable and wondered why they were throwing out crime scene evidence.
Right.
Then there was a report in the New York Times. I mean, this is a bit dark, but there was a report in the New York Times that the bound hands of one of the flight attendants was found on the roof of the firehouse across from the South Tower. That was reported in the New York Times.
Well, there were a number of reports over the years of bone fragments from passengers from the planes being found on the rooftops.
Yes.
Of, the adjoining nearby buildings and such, which, for the people arguing out there that there were no planes, that they weren't the passenger planes we were told, and stuff like that. I mean, it just debunks that instantly.
Well, and Ballone and Damasi both told me they found remains of passengers in airline seats. These were people who were eventually identified by the coroner. So, I mean, from my experience talking to the people who went through the catacombs there, I mean, Mike Ballone, whatever way the media may have portrayed him, one of the unique features of all these people were, while everybody was trying to get as far away from southern Manhattan, there were plenty of people who were actually running towards southern Manhattan trying to help, and Mike Ballone was one of them. And he never left Ground Zero. He basically slept on a pew at the church at Ground Zero. He did not leave until the last beam was recovered. So he also was able to obtain artifacts, photos that the volunteers were told was illegal for them to take. Mike,
when you said the last beam was recovered?
Yeah, until the cross was taken out, the last beam, he basically stayed for that entire cleanup operation.
Really?
And with regards to that, and Nicholas Damasi spent months down on the pile, and
Right.
as a result of that, got cancer from the toxic dust. And I think it was 2015 that he passed away. So my condolences to the Damasi family for that.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing is a lot of the people down there, like if you were a firefighter and you'd been on that job for any time and you're getting close to the time of retirement, like Nick was, they were afraid to lose their pension if they spoke out. So in other words, there was nothing when that article was released, like when we posted in October and then of 2004, and then Will Bunch wrote an article. He backed it up. He interviewed both of them.
For the Philadelphia Daily News.
Yes, for the Philadelphia Daily News. And then that led to another journalist, an independent investigative journalist, David Lindorf, who had a contact at the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, D.C., who told him off the record the FBI brought him the black boxes from Ground Zero, and he recovered the data and turned it over to the FBI. So that independently corroborated the story that Damasi had told before the commission claimed these boxes had disappeared. So whatever was on those boxes, apparently we don't know what it was, but whatever was on those cockpit voice recorders or on the flight data recorders apparently was so damaging that there was, I call them fingerprints or footprints. It's when the powers that be go out of the way to make certain bits of data disappear. You have to have a hell of a reason for doing that. You know, like another one is, you mentioned Building 7. There was a team of federal agents dispatched to Ground Zero to locate hard drives, not people. And this is a story that doesn't get told very often. Those hard drives were sent to a company in Germany called Convar. Convar. And this is a story that has essentially disappeared. And Convar bragged in interviews that they used a blue light technology, laser technology, and they showed the pictures of the dust encrusted hard drives and stated unequivocally they recovered 100% of the data and returned the data to the FBI. There is no mention of these hard drives or Convar in the commission report. So again, it doesn't mean there's anything nefarious here, but the question is, what was so important that instead of looking for survivors, you're recovering hard drives, shipping them around the world, and then not reporting to the American people that this event even occurred?
Yeah, and then didn't Deutsche Bank or something get a hold of that too, or they were trying to or something? I remember reading about this, and then who bought out Convar and owns them now?
That's a good question. Convar was eventually bought out, and the company was all split up. I don't remember who it was, but basically that was one way to disperse the team that knew what was on the hard drives. And this is This is a frequent pattern you actually see with certain companies that had connections or contact or became part of the story too. What were you going to say, John? It was about Deutsche Bank.
No, actually, I was going to mention something about. Go on. Keep talking what you were talking about.
So Deutsche Bank, the only connection I remember was that Buzzy Krongard, former director of Central Intelligence, happened to be the manager of Deutsche Bank on 9/11, and many of the stock trades were traced to Deutsche Bank where he worked. Right. And I believe these were some of the trades that there were claims that people never cashed them in, that left money on the table for some reason. And of course, the commission report never did say who was behind any of the pre-9/11 trading, which the commissioners told me and several others of us when we interviewed them in DC during the outside the hearing rooms, that they would give specific answers, and their answers were not only not specific, they were disingenuous. They basically claimed that an options newsletter writer had recommended shorting airlines before 9/11. This doesn't explain who shorted the insurance companies, who shorted the companies that had offices that the planes actually hit, which is interesting. Not to read anything into that, but somebody happened to short the offices that the planes hit, which I've always found pretty damn interesting.
There were three studies done that basically confirmed there was, shady trading going on. And it happened during COVID. People, I think, in the Senate or the House were charged with insider trading, and then they were let off the hook or something.
Well, they passed a law making it legal.
Yeah, something.
You can't make this shit up.
And then for 10/7, which happened in Israel, there's allegations of insider trading, as well as multitudes of warnings that they received and such. But the one thing I wanted to mention about the black boxes, what was on them, us not knowing what was on those black boxes. Remember the destroyed FAA tapes from the air traffic controllers, where the guy, crushed the tape in his hand, put the different pieces in different trash cans throughout the building. I would love to have been a fly on the wall in those meetings to know what exactly, was said, because that's just so suspicious on so many different levels. And I think somebody, but I just gave you the link, Jeremy, to all of my research on that.
I see that.
So you may as well share that rather than me having to try to remember it.
There's another weird, twisted, arcane version, I believe, from an early version of History Commons, where, and the only reason I know this is because when I did the documentary Improbable Collapse, Jonathan Mark and several people in the Northeast brought me up there and arranged a 2-week tour. And Boston Center, which you can hear on the recordings, where the air traffic controllers were that were in charge of the Boston flights. Boston Center is not in Boston. Boston Center is in Nashua, New Hampshire. And there was this weird entry in the timeline that on 9/11, the FBI showed up at the Nashua, New Hampshire Air Traffic Control Center and evacuated it by telling them they had intelligence that claimed they were a potential target for a crashed plane. And the only reason this stood out as really bizarre is I happened to be passing by it on the way to a screening. And I remembered that the story said that the FBI took the air traffic controllers to the local Holiday Inn. And when I went by the Nashua Control Center, the Holiday Inn's across the street. So why would you take them to a building across the street if you're claiming that they're going to fly a plane into the building? So that's when they went and cleaned out the actual records of the air traffic controllers. This is another one of these pieces that gets forgotten. And so it's interesting, having been looking at this for going on 21 years for me, 22 years for John.
I generally tell people I've forgotten more about 9/11 than most people know about
Right.
9/11.
And then the strangeness of this is that if you've done it long enough and you continue to pay attention, pieces of information come out over 20 years, something we didn't know, but we thought we had an idea about what was going on, and we made certain guesses.
Well,
But if
also the reasons for classification expire, so when you can FOIA this information too. So I think that's why hasn't anyone tried? Has anyone tried to recently FOIA the tapes that were stolen from across the Pentagon, the footage from the gas station across the street?
Years ago on flight77.info FOIA'd for those tapes, and they got a description. What was it, 85 tapes?
Yeah.
And none of them had what they were looking for, essentially,
Right.
if I remember how it was described.
I mean, from the beginning, there were people who were very forceful about the notion there was no Flight 77 at the Pentagon. And there was a group that was incredibly forceful that there was Flight 77. And to this day, I've personally felt that was a red herring for a variety of reasons.
Go ahead.
But in my experience, for example, with the media, when the Pentagon, quote, released the video of Flight 77, which was the way they were hyping it, ABC World News Tonight sent a camera crew to my living room to interview me, and I was on the phone with the producer who was asking me the questions, and there was just a camera crew at my house. And the producer, and at the same time as I was doing this with ABC, Janice was on with the BBC at her house. And when we got done with the interviews that we got together, it was really interesting. We were both asked the same questions the same exact way. And the question was, why don't you think Flight 77 hit the Pentagon?
Exactly. We all think this.
And I said over and over again, to me, the issue isn't whether or not Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. The question is, how could anything hit the Pentagon? We're asking the wrong question here. This is the most heavily defended airspace in the United States. They knew, from Monetta's testimony, a plane was heading towards DC. They didn't evacuate the Capitol. They didn't evacuate the Pentagon, and they didn't defend the Pentagon with surface-to-air missiles or with anybody launching a fighter from a base whose sole mission was to protect DC the day before 9/11. And then Barry Zwicker, a Canadian media person, had screenshots of the Andrews Air Force Base website on 9/11 and the day after. On 9/11, the mission at Andrews Base was to protect P-56, the airspace over Washington, D.C. And the day after 9/11, their mission on the website was changed to be basically a maintenance depot.
Well, with regard to the Pentagon, and I have two things to say.
Yeah.
My question that I always ask of people, because I've always thought Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. One of my mentors, John Judge, also thought Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. And John was one of those people, just an amazing speaker and encyclopedia of knowledge that was shunned by the 9/11 truth movement and driven away, essentially, because of his beliefs about Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon and the buildings and whatnot. But with regards to the Pentagon, my question has always been, how is it possible that a hijacked commercial airliner managed to penetrate DC airspace 34 minutes after the second tower was hit, when everybody in the world knew that America was under attack. And another thing about the Pentagon, there was a book called Firefight written by some of the responders down there. And one of them mentioned that they saw bodies still strapped into their seats, charred and whatnot.
In the plane?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. They didn't say. They just mentioned
Not in the plane, but in the building.
Yeah, in the building.
Yeah, I was
Strapped
contacted
into their seats. I thought
Right.
with seatbelts, you brace for landing with your seatbelts or whatever. But with Flight 77, the pilot of that plane was Charles Burlingame. He was the head of the Mascal drill, so that simulated a plane strike.
By the way, that may not actually be accurate, because that's a story that was planted, and I use that term intentionally, by Barbara Honegger.
Oh, there you go.
Back in 2002, she got it into Nafiz Ahmed's book, and she has maintained that story this whole time. I questioned her years ago on the original 9/11 Rise Up list with the original researchers, where we had an email list, and I asked her to please provide the source, because the two articles I found had her name on them. And when I asked her, she said, she said something that was so contradictory. I still remember it. It was like 16 years ago. She's like, I have to contact those people to get my name off that. And I'm really glad that information is still out there. Well, which is it? Yeah, it was confusing, but she could never provide a source. She was the source. There's nothing to substantiate that story.
And there are many instances of that. People planning different stories that have just Judy Woods. We talked about this last time, Jeremy. People should go watch that guy destroy her on video.
Greg Jenkins,
just destroy her.
So, like, one of the things, if I recall, didn't she show pictures of burned cars on FDR Drive as evidence of a directed energy weapon of some sort? So I had contacted her. Those cars were towed from underneath Ground Zero to FDR Drive.
Yeah.
I have photos of the cars before they were towed.
They're all from the parking garage.
Right, exactly.
There you go, Judy Woods fans.
They were from like 6 stories under steel reinforced, Faraday cage, concrete construction. That's how they build these parking garages. It's steel like they literally have poured pans and like steel reinforced thing, and
which points to the evidence there were bombs in the sub-basements to cut the base of the structure, which you also got from what was the maintenance guy's name? Nick Morelli. I don't know if you've ever seen that clip from NY1, where he was a maintenance worker, and he's talking about going to the machine shop and how he also, loved all the people, and it was a city to itself. And he's in the machine shop in the North Tower, and I don't remember if it's in B3 or B4, which floor it's on. And he goes, I'm changing. And all of a sudden I hear like this big explosion. And he goes, I'm thinking they dropped something really heavy on the B2 loading dock. And he goes, and then I open up the door, and like the heavy equipment in the machine room is gone. The walls in the sub-basement have imploded. There are people he's describing people with shrapnel wounds with flesh hanging off their skin. And then he says he helps these people, and they make their way underground to go out beneath the South Tower. And then he goes, and it happened all again. They happened to be in the sub-basement when the second plane hit. So there's some evidence that, people may have attributed to the collapse or the free fall of a freight elevator. I've heard people try to blame this on. I don't think it's going to implode concrete walls and give people shrapnel wounds throughout the sub-basements of the building, though. There was something.
Also, there were sky lobbies on the 33rd and the 66th floor, so it couldn't be an elevator from the top level where the planes hit, because it stopped at the 66th floor.
Right. And there's a baffling system in each floor to close it off if there's a fire, so fire can't spread down the elevator shafts too. There were all kinds of problems
Yeah.
with claims people made about what happened.
There was something I wanted to do at the beginning of the show, and I just completely forgot. Is I
We
wanted
could
to
start over.
No, I just wanted to have a moment of silence for the people that are currently being slaughtered in Gaza, the people being slaughtered in Ukraine. Um, the things that are going on right now, it's just horrible. So, can we have a moment of silence for the people that are suffering right now and died? I guess that's good enough.
Yeah, man. Thanks, John. And you know what? It's crazy that the war on terror that they started on 9/11 with
Still going on.
terrorism expert who went on, missed work that day in the towers to go on national TV to give us the first pronouncement of the official story that morning, and then went on to head the whole Iraq invasion and that whole travesty and quagmire that they set up over in Iraq. It's just that's some real stuff, and for this people
Well,
think
the 2001 authorization for use of military force that was written days after 9/11, specifically to go after those responsible for 9/11, is still in effect and is still being used in places like, I think we're screwing around again in Iraq now. Are we again, or never left?
Iraq, Syria, Libya. Yeah, I mean, I believe we're in over 7 countries dropping bombs currently.
Well, according to the Smithsonian's website, we've been operating militarily in 80 different countries during the war on terror.
but the drone strikes too, so that we're doing these top secret drone strikes in all these other countries, and we have these capabilities to go in there covertly and do this.
The funeral and wedding killers.
Well, and we continue to build bases in all these countries.
And we continue to add countries to NATO. I think Finland and Sweden just joined.
Yeah, it wasn't the State of the Union address. Biden even congratulated the leader of Sweden for joining NATO.
I just want people to know that Joe Biden's speech was meant to pump people up for war.
Yeah,
that's what it was meant for.
It will go down in history, man. That was insane. You watched it.
FDR and the World War II, and it just it was disgusting to see, just disgusting. And then when he was talking about how we've been in discussions to have a ceasefire and blah blah blah, all they would have to do, Joe Biden would have to pick up the phone, call Netanyahu, and say, "Stop what you're doing, okay? Just stop what you're doing." And I believe Netanyahu would stop, but they wouldn't do that.
It's not profitable.
It's because we live in a bizarre world where the right thing never takes place, or the people who should be doing the right things are doing the exact opposite.
Right. To blow the place up before they fix it. It's the exact opposite of what all these people think are waiting for. They're waiting for the Messiah to come and unite that land and rebuild the temple at the Temple Mount and
people don't realize the Temple Mount is important to all 3 Abrahamic religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam.
Right.
And
that's what God wants, but the devil run the world, man. The devil is running the world.
Well, I mean, it's greedy humans. And the saddest part to all of this is that these events are used and perpetuated by getting us to divide and hate each other when we are the ones who have more in common, and that united we would be able to change direction, but we just don't seem to be able to do it. My bigger concern is we now are facing crises globally that we cannot solve at the level we've created them, and the misdirection of resources to endless killing, destroying the environment, And to basically, stirring people up to insane behavior like mass murder, it doesn't really bode well for the species survival if we continue in this direction. And I believe people know this inherently, but it's like we're deer caught in the headlights. Nobody knows what the hell I can do as an individual to change things.
Well, there was somebody, Christian Brautweiser mentioned that it took, the four widows to force Washington, D.C. to create the 9/11 Commission, as fucked up and compromised as that was. What could 8 people do? What could 16 people do? Imagine what 32 people could do. And yet we can't come together. Why? We need to understand as a people that the things that are affecting us are affecting all of us, and they just have an amazing knack for putting a partisan label or a partisan hitch to things that just are nonpartisan. Like the environment has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not people are Democrat or Republican.
But it has a lot to do if you can make a lot of money stealing the resources that are there, no matter what happens. I mean, to me, the craziest part is these people have children and grandchildren. Like, what kind of world do they think they're leaving their own children? Like, the kind of disconnect that has to go on in their minds about the way they're leaving the world. I mean, like, I remember when Bush was in Maine with the grandkids, and the grandkids couldn't go out because there was like a hole in the ozone layer over Maine. And I was like, this is so bizarre. How did they not see how the policies that they promote are killing off the future for their own family? That to me is the strange, like the really difficult disconnect, that somehow they think with wealth they're going to be immune, like they're going to find another planet, or they're going to live happily ever after in a bunker. Doesn't sound like my ideal way to spend the future.
Right, it does not. And I honestly, I don't know how to get everybody together. After 9/11, this country came together like never before in my lifetime. And we were told to go shopping, if you remember.
And Disney, don't leave Disney out.
I would love for the people to come together again for 9/11, but this time to do the right thing, to make sure that a real criminal investigation takes place, where there's subpoena power and discovery and the ability to call people under oath to testify publicly. And if they're
the right people, where it's not like they don't just bring Judy Wood and Ace Baker in there and make a
Ace Baker. There's a fucked up name I haven't heard in a long time. The families want to be part of any investigation that takes place, and they were part of the 9/11 Family Steering Committee, which supplied the 9/11 Commission with hundreds of well-researched questions to answer, but they had no say as to whether or not the 9/11 Commission would actually ask the questions they wanted asked. So they want a controlling position in any investigation that takes place, if it ever does in the future. And I can understand why. They wanted that from the start, but
that's not how the government's going to work, though. I mean, that's the way they set up the 9/11
well,
Commission.
No. I don't think the next investigation should be done by the government.
It can't be. It can't be. I mean, look what happens. We had this anomaly resolution office to investigate UFOs, but nothing to investigate the trillions missing from the Pentagon budget and the decades of like black budget programs that I've documented on my website for like 20 years, and they want everyone to think it's aliens flying around out there and not our own technology and stuff. It's a complete opposite solution that they always offer, and I feel like it's going to be the same thing with the 9/11 stuff. They're going to set up these offices to investigate space lasers and the DEWs, and I would love to see the capabilities of what they've developed under the Star Wars program and the SDI defense systems that they have in these classified programs and stuff. I just don't think that they have free energy or the capabilities to really do all that stuff. So I just
Anyway.
haven't seen it. But anyways, yeah, I hope we get like a real investigation that can actually call the people involved.
That's what I was kind of hoping for with regard to the Saudi lawsuit. It doesn't matter. It could be a lawsuit about anything. This just happens to be about Saudi Arabia. But they do have the power to subpoena. They do have the power of discovery in some cases. And I think I told Mike this earlier today. There were 3 people the families were looking for the discovery for Fahad al-Thumari, Omar al-Bayoumi, and Osama Biznan. And the redacted 28 pages was covered up and kept secret for so many years because it showed that Bandar gave a suitcase of money to Osama Biznan. And for some reason, in the family lawsuit, the judge decided there will be no discovery on Osama Biznan. And I say, for some reason, Lori Van Auken and 9/11 family, I said, for some reason, and she wrote back, quotes, for some reason, they did what they did. Which we know it was because Bush was close personal friends with him, and they talked about personal possible embarrassment they might face. But it had a lot more to do with it, obviously, than that. But yeah, that's what I was kind of hoping for, because they don't want 9/11 in a court of law. I've documented that a lot. They just do not want 9/11 in a court of law. Every time that happens, like we saw with the Moussaoui sentencing phase, things come out.
Yeah.
We saw Coach Witten. What were they doing? They were coaching the witnesses. What? Why the need?
The justice system, man, it's ridiculous. They do that all the time, and they'll literally, yeah, it's so backwards and crazy what they've done, and what they're able to do. I would just say, like, it needs prosecutors in such a case would have to be held to standards, because it's ridiculous corruption and means of extortion. I mean, look what happened in BCCI. Giuliani was the prosecutor for BCCI. Ends up getting off completely because he botched the whole case, and then he ends up leaving the prosecutor's office and going to work for the law firm that represented BCCI in the trial. So it's like they just buy out the prosecutors and they switch sides. So there has to be some kind of prosecutor conduct that has to be taken or something. There's nothing like that in the system. These prosecutors just can run free and do whatever they want. And it needs to be, they need to it's a murder investigation, so means, motive, and opportunity. And if they're not focusing on those 3 things and going after those 3 things, I think that they should be investigated themselves.
If you haven't seen it, Netflix just dropped, the Duplass brothers did a documentary called American Conspiracy, The Octopus Murders. And the Octopus Murders are connected to the original Bush gang and Iran-Contra. But the point of watching it is, like, when I hear you talk about prosecutorial misconduct and all the different agendas, like, that story is so much like investigating 9/11 in terms of the kind of characters you wind up confronting, where even the people doing the investigating begin to question their own sanity and question what the heck it is that they're doing.
Well, I've been having conversations with Chat GPT about 9/11 just to show myself that I'm right and have always been right in doing what I've done for 9/11. When I convince the artificial intelligence or, show them things and they agree with me, and that's just for shits and giggles. I've been doing that, but I know I've done the right thing. I have no regrets. It was always the right thing to do. It was an absolute good.
Yeah, standing up for the truth. I mean, personally, the people that I've met through this work, many of them, not all of them, but many of them sacrificed relationships with friends and family. This is not, when you talk about, like, and if you watch the the octopus murder thing. I mean, you'll begin to see how this guy's character, his personality changed over time just from being in this dark, murky underworld. It twists the way you see the world. And once you see through the 9/11 story, whatever it is that opens up your eyes, you can't unsee it. So like you either have to repress it or you have to live with it. And if you live with it and can't keep your mouth shut, the people you care about are going to get sick and tired of hearing it in most cases. And the more you talk about this with people who can't tolerate the implications of what you're sharing, and this is true of UFOs especially too, like anything where you're questioning the group's reality. So if it's academics about what Graham Hancock is talking about ancient civilizations,
Right.
they have the power in their roles in academia. But another side to all of this is, I believe what we're witnessing, people keep saying, tear it down, burn it down. I think what we're witnessing is that these institutions have all lost their legitimacy. I mean, just from glancing at some of the comments in the comments section here, like, people are onto this now. People see through it. It doesn't mean that we know the damn truth, but we know when we're being lied to.
Where are you seeing comments? I don't see anything. I'm in this.
There's a private chat window and then a comments window.
Oh, I see that.
There's a
now.
live chat on. We're live on
Yeah.
YouTube. We got 250 people watching, and the live chat's very active. We got
Yes, it is. And I'm like, I'm taken in by some of the things I'm catching that people are saying, because like, many of these, many of the things we're talking about that you come across in investigating 9/11, they're connected to other historic events, for example. Like, I thought it was interesting. Like, a friend of mine told me about American Conspiracies. I watched it, and all I could say is, like, I could relate to so many things in there, like, especially when the person this guy, Danny Canestrano, who was not a journalist, he was a writer who kind of fell into this thing. That's a very good point about the size of their ego. But basically, when he fell into this investigation, it so changed him that you would see over time when he was visiting with his family. This guy was like a happy-go-lucky kind of light guy. And towards the end of his life, man, he was sitting there mumbling about how his family, how they couldn't hear it. Like, they didn't want to see it. They were tired of hearing it.
You're talking about Donald Canestraro?
Danny Canestrano. And what's interesting is Rupert
Canestraro too, but
not Straro. I think it's Canestrano.
Okay.
And what's interesting is Michael Rupert, who wrote the book making the argument that Dick Cheney was the mastermind in crossing the Rubicon 23 years ago. He's got a post. He's no longer with us, but at his website, From the Wilderness, which is still online, where he outlines this whole story that the Duplass brothers just did. And he names even more names than they do in their show, but it's connected to the same people behind 9/11, which is just bizarre.
Well, when we say the people behind 9/11, I honestly can't tell you who was ultimately responsible for 9/11, what exactly happened that day. And it made me a better activist when I admitted that to myself. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I'm just pointing out that, like, for one, looking at this stuff changes you. You can't unsee it, right? And that, so one of the characters in there, basically, who was involved in doing this kind of investigative work, basically says, at one point I had to decide, like, do I want to keep doing this, or do I want to have a life? Do I want to go back and have a life? So finding some balance in doing this work, I think, is critical for longevity. Otherwise, you lose your freaking mind and you'll wind up isolated. And I think ultimately that's kind of the way to burn people out who question.
Oh,
Don't bring them together. Don't let them organize. Don't let them talk with each other. Don't let them talk to the public, and generally make them out to be crazy. Like going back to the black box story, one of the things that John brought to my attention, he was looking at 9/11 myths and looking at how they character assassinated this guy, Mike Malone. And yet, so I sent John, like, people had claimed all along that he was never an honorary firefighter. And it was not his fault that in media appearances, which he did hundreds, people, the newscasters would bring him on and claim he was a firefighter. He did not tell them he was a firefighter, and he would go on and clarify he was an honorary firefighter. But for example, to attack this guy's credibility, they claimed he wasn't an honorary firefighter. And so I sent John the photo of the chief of the New York City Fire Department at the ceremony where they inducted him to be an honorary firefighter, and I sent a screenshot of the damn award. So, like, the people who are making these claims of debunking and attacking this guy, are they pretending they couldn't look this up? Are they pretending they don't know this? Or is there some, like, why would you keep attacking a guy's credibility, especially when the story he's telling you was told before you would have been suspicious that he was lying? He didn't know the
fact
government.
that it was Nicholas DeMassi's story.
That's true.
And
but it was in Mike's book, so
right.
Mike got blamed. But again, it's a misdirect.
What I was going to say about not knowing who was ultimately responsible for 9/11, what I've generally been saying now is that the system that brought us Iran-Contra, that brought us UPCI, the savings and loan scandal, all that shit is the same system that brought us 9/11. And you can see a lot of the same players, obviously, are in the pot, of suspects. And there are many people in our government who have more than earned the title of suspect just from their actions alone or inactions for 9/11. And that's the best I can go on. I can look at 9/11 as a crime and not an act of war. And as with every crime, there are suspects for that crime. And as I said, people within our government and other governments, because of their own actions, have more than earned.
I think that the financing was of major concern, and that was put as it was of little concern in the 9/11 Commission.
Well,
into the financing.
The 9/11 report said twice it was of little practical significance in the report.
It was major practical significance.
And in the terrorist monograph on financing, they also repeated the claim that it was of little practical significance.
Yeah.
Well, and then you had like the stories that would come out where, for example, the breakfasts with Porter Goss and the two Florida guys, Porter Goss and Bob Graham, who, like, it's so hard to figure out who's on what side. They have a breakfast meeting with Mahmoud Ahmed from the Pakistani ISI, the equivalent of the CIA, who had allegedly ordered a wire transfer of $100,000 to Mohammed Atta. And then again, like, things drip out over time. So there were news reports that Pakistan bribed the commission to leave references out of Pakistan's involvement in financing these attacks. So they've managed, for 20 years, they've kept the Saudis protected in at bay.
Yeah, exactly. People say, they're going to point the finger at the Saudis and that'll be the end of it. We're going to go to war with the Saudis. You can't point a finger at Saudi Arabia and not have five fingers pointing back at the U.S. Just from their accessories after the fact, just for covering up Saudi Arabia's role. And when you talk about the financing of the attacks, part of the financing came from the Bandar family. Princess Haifa, through Riggs Bank, sent money to the wife of one of the people. I can't remember the full story. And, as I said, Bandar gave money directly to Osama Biznan in a suitcase. And
now that was this part of the San Diego cell.
Yeah, the San Diego cell. And I found out recently, just within the last week, that somebody who sat on the board of Riggs Bank was somebody by the name of Jonathan Bush, who is the uncle of George Bush.
Oh, wow, huh?
So,
that's funny.
Yeah. So I wonder why they kept that all covered up.
There's so many weird connections with that family. It's crazy.
Pretty
Guys, I want
miraculous.
to play. We're at the top of the hour now, so I want to give you guys a break. I want to keep going. If you guys are down to keep going,
Yeah, I can keep going.
so I want to take a quick 4-5 minute intermission. So go grab a drink, run to the bathroom. I'm gonna play a quick clip, and we'll get right back to it.
Alrighty.
One of my favorites.
A deal announced yesterday between the White House and the commission investigating the September 11th attacks is
I know it well.
controversial. Under the agreement, only certain members of the commission will be allowed to review classified documents from the White House, and their notes will be subject to administration review. Today, some relatives of people who were killed in the attacks criticized the agreement, and our next guest, who's a member of the commission, claimed the deal is disgusting. Former Georgia Senator Max Cleland, a Democrat, joins me here in Washington. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. Some of the members of the commission say this is a fair compromise. First of all, what's the deal? What's the notion of this agreement?
Well, you've used the word deal 3 times. I don't think the 9/11 Commission ought to be making deals with our own government under the responsibility we have from the Congress and our responsibility to the American people
The White
to
House
get all
claimed-
the facts about all the commissioners. Look at those facts. Now, we've had to subpoena the FAA for those documents. We've had to subpoena NORAD for those documents. I'm in favor of subpoenaing the White House for the documents we need so that all the commissioners can get to see all the documents that we need. That's the only way we can face the American people and the families and say we have done a thorough investigation independently of the White House and the entire executive branch.
Some of the commissioners, including Richard Ben-Benisty, who's a Democrat, a former Watergate prosecutor, says this is a fair arrangement. 4 members of the commission will be able to have access to these classified documents. They'll be able to review them and eventually make some of the information available to the other members of the commission, depending on what the White House says.
Secondhand. I mean, the president has said only a minority of the commission can see a minority of the documents, and then they have to clear what they're going to say to the rest of the commission with the White House.
If you're one of those 4 that gets to see these documents, would that change your opinion?
No, because all the members of the commission are legitimate members of the commission. We have the top security clearances. We're an independent commission. For an independent operational look at why 9/11 happened, what happened there, what the president and the government knew, and when they knew it.
What's their
We need to know all
argument?
the
The White House. Why won't they let you see this? What do they say?
Access. They don't want any more eyeballs to see their documents than they can possibly get away with. It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting. This is an independent commission looking at the most serious attack on this homeland since the British invaded this country in the War of 1812. This is important. We cannot do our responsibilities if we don't have, all of us, access to all the documents we need, including what's in the White House. Now, we've already had to go to the wall for documents with the FAA and NORAD in a subpoena.
So why do you
I think we ought to subpoena the White House documents and get on with this investigation.
Why do you think your chairman, the former Republican governor of New Jersey, Tom Kaine, other members of the commission, apparently a majority, have accepted this arrangement with the White House?
It's a deal. We shouldn't be in the business of making deals. We should not be in the business of taking some commissioners and say they get to see some information cleared by the White House and other commissioners don't. And then they got to clear it with the White House to come back to tell those commissioners what that's all about. I think this is ludicrous.
So what, if anything,
here.
can you do about it?
Well, first of all, I'm very much for issuing a subpoena to those in the White House that would obstruct this investigation. And that's what we have here, an obstruction of a full investigation on the most serious attack on the homeland in the last 150 years.
Before I let you go, let me shift gears for a moment. What's happening in Iraq right now? You wrote a provocative piece the other day suggesting there were parallels to Vietnam, a subject you know all too well. What's your main fear right now?
Well, we're in a mess. And we have no strategy to win, and we have no strategy to get out. That's Vietnam all over again. And we're losing more casualties now, just in the last week, than in any period since Vietnam. We've extended the tour of duty of guardsmen and reservists, and that's going to take a tremendous toll on our communities. They ought to be at home looking after homeland security.
You want just to pick up and leave?
We got to get the UN in and get NATO in.
One thing I wanted to mention, and you guys, we were talking about burnout and balancing your lives. Are we back? Can you hear me? Okay. I feel a sense of responsibility almost to hang around, just so people are aware of the context that you were talking about before with me, Mike, that they're aware of the history, because so many people just don't know it. And it's as because of the fact that I
refuse to even look at it.
Yeah, they refuse to look at it, but they just don't know it. And for those who are attempting to learn about it or tell people about it, I feel a sense of responsibility to stick around and try and help those people for some reason.
Out of curiosity, I'm going to pop this link in the chat. There was a CBS News report. Do you remember this recently on the anniversary? I think it was maybe the 20th, where an FBI one. Yeah, this was on the right before the 20th anniversary. Former FBI agent who worked on still secret FBI 9/11 cases. Hijackers had U.S.-based support network. Operation Encore. Do you know about that, John?
Operation Encore was an FBI investigation that took place, started, I think, after the 9/11 Commission it finished its work. Is that when it started? Or
I don't know. It says that it is a still secret investigation, which centered on the hijackers in San Diego, the part that you were talking about earlier.
I don't know exactly everything there is to know about Operation Encore. I will tell you to go to the Florida Bulldog, where Dan Christensen is the editor and journalist who's written a lot about it. If you want to learn about Operation Encore, it had a lot to do with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that was around. Well, this FBI agent came out and said that there was U.S. financing and support for the San Diego cell, which to me was new news.
No, I'd never heard that before. What I had heard, came out recently with that Canestraro guy I was telling you about. He said that there was the CIA and the Saudis were working together with regard to what was taking place in San Diego. And they say, it was to flip them to get insiders in, Al-Qaeda and so forth. And my counter to that, aside from how long does it take to realize that somebody's not going to flip? They were in this country for a long time.
We're all optimists at the CIA, John.
Why not do this outside of the country where you don't put Americans at risk, by allowing these terrorists to come on American soil where the CIA is not allowed to operate and try to turn them there? Why not do it where Americans won't have a threat of being injured? But besides that, Prince Bandar is essentially the best insider of Al-Qaeda that you could get. He is somebody who's intimately familiar with the terrorist system. If you remember during the BAE scandal, he threatened Britain with terrorist attacks if they didn't drop the BAE scandal. He's also responsible for sending in terrorists into Syria when that whole debacle took place. So he's intimately familiar with Al-Qaeda. So they, George Tenet used to go to his house and swim in his swimming pool and smoke his cigars and go on drunken tirades about how he hates the Jews and stuff like that. And I'm sure they talked about a number of things, different things. So if they wanted an insider into Al-Qaeda, especially somebody, my God, he only helped to finance the attacks. You have the perfect insider in Prince Bandar. They didn't need to do what they supposedly were doing in San Diego. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, I just think there are so many different threads in this story, and when you pull on them, the story begins to fall apart.
Well,
I want to return to what Jeremy said. I mean, people's resistance to hearing this is pretty well grounded in survival. I mean, if
that was part of the post 9/11 world indoctrination. The people that were born around the time of 9/11 who were indoctrinated into the post 9/11 world were taught that questioning 9/11 was bad. Literally.
Well, I like how it just from an intelligence perspective, it benefited so many different institutions to just go along with the official story, that they got so many of the top people to just go with it and roll with it. From the media, selling news stories like crazy, selling more newspapers, selling more like, it was great for the media. It was great for the war machine. It was great for Kellogg, Brown and Root. It was great for Raytheon, Halliburton, the banks, everyone, like they got to get all that fresh currency flow, would keep the drug trade going, so the Taliban couldn't shut off the opium supply. There was just numerous people involved.
You remember that story, how the Taliban managed to destroy 90% of the opium crops
before we invaded,
prior to our invasion?
Yes.
Yeah.
After our invasion, for almost 20 years, Afghanistan led the world in opium production, upwards of 97% supplying the world.
Hey, I've met people who've come back from their service in the military and told me that they personally guarded opium fields and said, "What was that about?"
I've seen actual news stories, I think, about that.
Yeah. So, what's going on?
Conversations with, I had a friend who was in the military from high school, said that he was over there and they were like they would go and slash a couple, but it would just 10 more would pop up, and that they just couldn't do anything about it.
And yet somehow the Taliban could, because you knew you'd be dead if you grew it.
Right.
But I want to go back to like what you said about the post 9/11 aftermath here. So there are people who are using a term, I don't know if anybody here's heard of it, called fifth generation warfare, which is basically a divide and conquer strategy to destroy the country from within. We saw, like, to me, what's so fascinating is reliving so many of the lessons we had to learn in the truth movement and watching people relearn them and having not even knew that the truth movement had already been through this.
I know.
So like the disinformation campaigns, the way votes are counted, the way money is funneled through different bills that ostensibly have the opposite name of what the bill is going to do, like the Patriot Act, for example. Just this entire kind of the underbelly to where private interests and government collude, and their primary mission is to retain the power that they have. And in order to do that, they have got to have us fighting with each other. So one of the fast things we learned in 9/11 was we started organizing groups. People would show up all over the world and they would say, "What can I do?" And they would spontaneously, grassroots, organize their own group in different cities around the world. And we never had a litmus test. We only asked the people agreed with our mission. But very quickly, we learned that as a city began to grow and their group hit a certain size, we saw the same pattern would unfold. Certain people who had joined the group would then begin to challenge whoever had originally started the group or led it, threw into question their motives, labeled them a government agent, and split the group.
Snitch jacketing.
Yeah. And there's only one group that I'm aware of that actually managed to not be destroyed by that, and that was the Denver group, which coincidentally, I think the majority of them were psychologists. So somehow they were able to fend this off when it happened to them. But
they had their problems of their own. But
of course, but I mean, this is just something to keep in mind if you're ever organizing. how to deal with the disruptors, deal with them as quickly as possible.
What I tell people is to judge people by the fruits of their labor. If they are consistently good in the work that they do, if they admit mistakes and correct mistakes, if they are pleasant to be around, generally those are the people you want to be with. The people that, and I've been guilty of this, just start arguments with people all the time. Throughout 23 years I've been doing this, I've been a part of a lot of bad things that I probably shouldn't have done.
The good ones do it under a shell account, so it doesn't go back to their name.
Right. I always put my name out there. So, but I got involved in the infighting. I was part of the credibility police at one time, trying to maintain the credibility of the 9/11 truth movement. And that just, once you realize that you can only control your own actions, it saves a lot of time.
Well, they would just. I remember one of the first times I heard about it on the radio. I was starting to get into it, and I told my friend about it, and he was like, "Call me." He's like, "Yo, they're talking about it on the radio on WAAF here in Boston," and I turned it on, and it was all no planers, and I was like, "Oh man, I got to call in with some like information that I've been finding." So like I literally tried calling in. I used to call into the radio station all the time, and I sat on the phone for hours. And
that's because the media decided to glom on to loose change and depict that as what everybody else in the 9/11 truth movement believed. And that's how it was portrayed. And that's why controlled demolition and a missile hitting the Pentagon were primarily in every single hit piece ever written.
I have to make an obnoxious comment. Defectionist, the radio is something you can get on an app on your phone.
Well, I just want to give a quick shout out to the super chats that I didn't do before. Ian B, thank you for the $5. New Zealand money, $10 from Ben Love in New Zealand, and Finn Bugden down in Australia, down under with the $50.
Good day, mate.
Good day.
Good day. I speak Australian.
Yeah, but
that's not a knife.
Do you drive Australia?
That's not a knife. That's a knife. You remember that? Are you old enough to remember that, Jeremy?
I am. I am.
Good.
They not look like it. Thankfully,
yeah, Jeremy, you look like you're in your 20s, man. How old are you?
Thankfully, I'm in my 40s.
Oh.
So. Were you going to say, thankfully, you're not in your 20s?
No, well, yeah, and then we all made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah. Well, we were all learning. I mean, this was a crazy damn experience, the whole thing. I mean, I literally went from reading about put options to meeting Ellen Mariani and Phil Berg in Kansas City to being in San Francisco in March 2004 at the first International 9/11 conference. And got to meet Mike Rupert and Kyle Hentz and John Judge, Paul Thompson, like just a bunch of really incredibly brave people.
One of the most humbling experiences I ever had, it was in Chicago, and somebody asked me for my autograph.
And was that at the conference?
Yeah. And I'm like, why do you want my autograph? I'm just a person trying to, nobody's asked me since, but it was just a surreal experience.
That's awesome.
By the way, I'm giving out, selling them now for $500 a piece.
Yeah, you can buy them on his eBay store.
Exactly.
John the Truth Gold.
That's it. I want a signed copy of your book, man. Paperback.
Yeah, me too. Unfortunately, I never, except for Mike was the publisher of my first book.
That's right.
I can print it out and do like the binder thing, like I used to do with the,
Right. Mike and Janice ran a publishing company. They tried to start up
briefly. Yes, ebooks.
And I think you only did my book, wasn't it?
No, we did about 10 others.
Okay. Well, they did my book, and it was for Kindle, and they convinced me that we should do it with Kindle because that was the way of tomorrow. or something to that effect, as opposed to trying to get it printed, which I did try to do. I couldn't get a publishing company willing to do it. And so I and I wrote that book in 2 weeks. The first book, my first book, I wrote it in 2 weeks because I knew that if I had ever stopped, I would procrastinate and it would never get done. So I literally just sat at my computer and wrote a 400-page book in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then they edited it for me and made it Kindle friendly. And this has nothing to do with 9/11. It has something. So anyway, let's get back to 9/11. My favorite topic is Philip Zelikow. But you know what, Mike? Do you remember when John Judge talked about how the White House vetted each and every chapter of the 9/11 report?
Yeah.
Essentially making them co-writers of the 9/11 report.
Yeah.
The so-called independent 9/11 commission.
Mm-hmm.
Philip Zelikow is a massive problem, but you know what? So is the White House having a say as to what the hell is going to be in it and what is not going to be in it. It was such a slap in the face. And the reason I like to point to the 9/11 Commission was because it was sold to the world as the definitive account of 9/11. People believed there was an investigation done, and this is what the end result was. And it was anything but. It was such there's so many different names to call it, but there were so many problems with it. And the one I just mentioned about the White House vetting each and every chapter.
Well, or the lack of follow-up answers. Like they would say in commission testimony, oh, I don't recall. I'll have to get back to you. I'll have to get back to you. Like the famous scene where Cynthia McKinney confronts Rumsfeld.
Yes.
And she did it twice, apparently, on video, and they never gave her an answer to those questions.
No,
there was no accountability, like the clip that you played earlier. It was never about accountability.
Well,
it was a show.
At the very first public hearing, Thomas Keane said, "We are not here to point fingers."
Right.
And the families wanted exactly that. They wanted people in government who were in positions they should probably not have been to be held accountable. And instead, every single person that should have faced some form of accountability was rewarded and promoted.
Yeah.
And the reason that took place is because the minute that you hold someone accountable is the minute that they start to talk. What do you mean I didn't do my job?
Literally, that medals ceremony. If you go back to that first medals ceremony right after 9/11, I think it was I don't know if it was March 2002 or something. It's just like a lineup of all the people who should be subpoenaed and should have been arrested and rounded up and put under investigation. It's like, here they are. Just line them up and give them all medals and congratulate them. Give them a big slap on the back for protecting America so much.
There was a story about the radios that the families asked the head of the fire department's training unit to lobby Congress to hold hearings on the contract in New York City just over the firefighters' radios. So the firefighters went into the towers with the same radios they had in 1993. Yep. And that was because Giuliani's administration circumvented New York City contract procedural law. Instead of putting out a public call for bids for new radios, Motorola had already supplied the radios the fire department had. Giuliani's administration cut a backdoor deal. Instead of putting it out for contract, they just worded it as replacing non-functional radios. These radios were already really old. And this guy, John Joyce, took those radios out as part of his job to a field in Queens to test them. And the radios didn't work. They couldn't talk to each other in the field. When he went back to the office and he said to his boss, "I'll write the report," his boss said, "You may want to be careful about writing the report. You may not want to do it because they've ordered the radios." And Joyce said, "I'm going to write the report because somebody's going to die if they put these radios in the field." So the head of the fire department, by the way, Nicholas Scapetta, the same guy who is in the photos giving Mike Balone the honorary firefighter award, Scapetta orders the firefighters' old radios pulled into a warehouse, and they give them these new ones. And within the first week, a firefighter gets trapped in a burning building, and the guys outside from his house don't know he's in it. And another house responding from a couple of miles away, when they get there, said to the chief, you got a guy stuck in the building. Did you get him out? And the chief said, we didn't know. So they get the guy out, and he lives. Then the fire department's union goes crazy, and they force the city to take those brand new radios, and they pull them out of the field, and they reissue the old radios. So the firefighters were the only people with radios that didn't work in those buildings. And so the families just wanted to have an investigation into this contract. Like, this doesn't touch on any conspiracy theory at all, other than pure greed between Motorola and whatever was going on with the people in the Giuliani administration. And a Democratic representative, Carolyn Maloney, whose district cut through Manhattan, was lobbied by Jack Joyce and the families. And basically, we were there for, I guess this had to do, they were holding some kind of press conference about the Iraq War, she and Representative Murtha. And I went to the press conference, and I actually got called on. And so I was able to ask her, you told the families that if the Democrats took control of the House, that you would hold hearings on the radio contract. Now that the Democrats have been elected to the majority, when can we meet with you and John Joyce to hold the hearings? And she did her little song and dance about why we're not having these hearings. So if they weren't even going to have a hearing that they promised over just radios, the chance, I've always assumed there's no chance this was ever going to have a real investigation. I'd be delighted if we could just have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because the people involved are by and large dead.
A lot of them are Ernest May, Sandy Berger, someone I would have loved to have spoken to, Dana Leeseman. God, I can't think of them, all of them off the top of my head. But
Danny Joenko.
That's what I meant by they rely on the passage of time,
right,
to die off so that they can.
Barry Jennings.
Barry Jennings.
A number of people that have died off.
Nick DeMasi, for example. I mean, the people who were eyewitnesses to what
it's
actually
horrible.
happened.
I was talking to Mike about this earlier. It's horrible that Nicholas DeMasi was never interviewed. It was always Mike Balone. But Nicholas DeMasi,
that's because DeMasi didn't want to be interviewed because he wanted to collect his pension.
Right.
And I mean, he was not alone in that. There were a lot of people who did not feel safe in speaking out. They didn't want to lose what they had worked all life to accumulate. And I get it, man. I get it.
I will say
they bought so many people's silence. There wasn't a lot of thing too with in order to get treatment for them first responders and stuff. Because you had this illness that's going to cost your insurance isn't going to cover it, and it's going to cost you so much money to stay alive that the only way to live is to they had to sign gag orders and stuff too.
You want to know something disgusting? Yeah. John Field, who is the founder of the Feel Good Foundation, was told that he had to disassociate himself from the 9/11 truth movement if he wanted to get help for the 9/11 first responders. And I understood that, because it was a cause in and of itself. It was an extremely important cause, and he had to do whatever he had to do in order to get the help for the responders. And yet it still took how many fucking years for them to fight.
They're still fighting over and over again. Their fight never effing
down
ends.
To Washington, D.C. for something that they should automatically get. The same government that lied to them about the air and the water quality and so many different things is the same government that made it so difficult for them to get the health care that they needed. And Jon Stewart went down once with the Feel Good Foundation, and thanks to my efforts greatly, I helped put the Feel Good Foundation on the map. So that's something I consider.
You can feel good about,
huh?
Something you can feel good about.
Yeah, exactly. It's an accomplishment. I mean, after 23 years of doing this, you don't really accomplish much that you think you don't. You do. You know, you educate people. You might turn people on to certain things. You get people to question their government, which is always a good thing. But it's hard to pinpoint, where you've been successful and stuff. But that's something I can take to my grave, is that I helped to put the Feel Good Foundation on the map, which accompanied Jon Stewart to Washington, D.C. to fight for the health care that they got and still have to fight for. And you know how what was it? Trump was the last president who tried to put his fingers into the pot of money that was there for the 9/11 first responders to use for something else. Like, do you remember that?
I
I
don't.
think so.
It's just disgusting what
I
they've
never
done.
checked that. I never fact checked it. It could have just been like a Biden friggin'
No, it was a real
campaign
story.
propaganda story.
It was a real story. I remember posting it. I don't remember the
I
specifics.
wouldn't doubt it. I mean, Trump's literally went after. He stole so much money from every contractor ever worked for him and built all those all those empires, hotels.
I grew up in New York, and I personally knew families who were destroyed by being vendors to Trump in Jersey.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I heard a lot of the stories about that, and I'm a contractor, so the fact that he's burned hardworking people,
Right.
That's
Well,
really
thousands of people moved to Atlantic City to work for the Trump casinos, and he drove them into the ground, and all these people suddenly didn't have jobs. And,
Oh, by the way, yeah, the people in the chat. No, I'm not saying vote for Biden.
no.
That's not the point.
Joe Biden, somebody who met with Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed.
Vivek is one of the only ones who's from an express interest in investigating 9/11. So,
well, I mean, I do recall Trump saying that if I'm made president, I'm going to release everything. Yeah, and I've had several friends in the movement go, you see, and I was like, do you believe anything when any politician's lips move? You're crazier than I am.
From day one, I tried my best to warn people that he is just pulling you along. He's a bullshit artist. He's not going to do shit.
I can't believe Alex Jones went like full right wing. He Rush Limbaugh wannabe.
Alex Jones is a 9/11 profiteer. That's what he is. He made how much money, with his movies and his bullshit.
He was making big money on the Sandy Hook thing. That's why he promoted that. He
made big money off of a lot, and Alex, unfortunately,
lost it all because of
when I was on the steering committee when we had that conference in Chicago in 2006,
why don't you tell them the story of the tickets and stuff?
An unnamed member of the steering committee asked Alex to be a keynote speaker at the conference without asking the rest of us, and then somehow I got appointed to be the guy to negotiate with Alex. And I did not know who Alex was at the time. I was not really into conspiracies. And it was pretty damn funny, I'll say the least. Alex thinks he's very important and very special, and always has. And at least in my experience of him, he had zero integrity. His work meant shit, because turned out he was planning a conference 2 weeks after ours in LA. And he was like, hey, Burger, listen, if you can get Stephen Jones to come to the conference in LA, Burger, listen, if you get Stephen Jones to come to the conference in LA, I'll give you the red carpet treatment. I'll fly you out, give you a hotel room. So I was like, hey, I can ask him for you, but there's no guarantee. And I did. I asked him, and Stephen agreed, which surprised me. Then I didn't hear from Alex or his team. Yes, he is a rabbit hole. And then I called him, and he's like, yeah, Burger, I never said that. But I'll tell you what, Burger, if you get to LA, I'll give you a room. So
isn't it funny how everybody has their own Alex Jones?
Janice made sure that 911truth.org flew me out there. He wouldn't let me speak at the conference. I asked him if I could meet Charlie. When I tried to go into the green room to meet Charlie, he had security walk me out of the hotel. And then he was like schizophrenic, man. He had me kicked out, And then he came outside and invited me to be his guest at dinner that night with Stephen Jones and everybody else who was part of the conference. He's a weird guy.
Didn't he insist on first class tickets?
Yes, he wanted 2 first class tickets. He wanted us to fly his camera crew and give him multiple hotel rooms. And I had to explain to him that, like, we could give you 1 coach ticket, buddy. And if you want to bring your cameraman, he can sleep with you in the 1 room you're getting.
Yeah, 911truth.org had some supporters, but it did not have the supporters that some groups seemingly have, where they can raise.
Oh no, how we pulled that thing off was a miracle, man. We were in over our heads. We didn't realize till a week before we had set up multiple simultaneous stages without sound equipment for 4 stages.
9/11 reclaiming the truth. What
Yep.
was it? Revisiting the truth?
Revisiting the truth. Yeah. But I mean, that actually, it's very interesting. That conference was like the impetus for 10,000 9/11 websites. Like, everybody left Chicago, created websites, movies. They became like DVD duplicators, giving out millions of loose change DVDs. It really did. Things went crazy after that conference.
The thing that I loved about that conference is that's where the 9/11 Press for Truth was shown for the very first time in front of an audience. And I don't know if you know or not, I gave them the money to finish that film.
I did.
You know that. I don't know if Jeremy knew that. Yeah. And anyway, so I got to sit in with the audience and see their reaction. And they reacted perfectly, exactly as you would expect them to. Like, oh my God. And, you know, I can't believe he said that. Dick Cheney's a, you know, whatever.
It was a great movie.
Well, it's a great movie, but it was a great experience. And I just loved that. And then, you know, I showed 9/11 Press for Truth, the sequel to it, which is in their own words, the untold stories of the 9/11 families, 9/11 Dust and Deceit.
Yeah.
We showed these at a movie theater in Wayne, Pennsylvania for months. This was a very conservative section of Pennsylvania showing these lefty movies, which somehow 9/11 Truth is now the right wing.
Yeah.
It's so funny to me. It's so ridiculous.
Well, and recall in the beginning, basically, it was the far left and the far right that attacked us. There was nobody on our side. The progressives were terrible. I debated Matthew Rothschild, who is literally the editor of Progressive Magazine. So there was, you know, I did want to bring this up because he just doesn't go away. I wanted to ask you guys about Tucker Carlson.
Oh,
like, yeah. Tucker, you know, 15, 16 years ago, totally crapped on Stephen Jones, got him on the show. His producer asked Stephen Jones, what can we show? I know you're going to hate this, John, because it has to do with
I know what, but go ahead.
But, you know, he said, you know, I'd like you to show the clip of Building 7. They agreed. And then when he was on camera.
Now Tucker's on our side, though.
Well, yeah, see, and this is what I wanted to get to. Now, Tucker's on our side. I just saw an article this week that Tucker went on some kind of error-filled rant against George W. Bush and said that Bush fled Washington like a coward. Now, I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to wrap my head around how Tucker Carlson doesn't know where President Bush was on 9/11. I'm having a really difficult time with that. To me, it means either he doesn't do his own homework and people brief him right before every appearance, and he can't keep his shit straight anymore because he conflated Cheney's role with Bush's role, at least from what I've read. And people are saying like that Tucker is like on our side now. He's had this change. I don't know that anybody's ever on, quote, our side. I don't know what side that is.
One thing Tucker did prove of a point that I've made so many times over the years to people with a voice that are afraid of losing their pulpits and their money by being painted with the 9/11 truth brush. If they did a really good job and wrote a really good article, their popularity would soar amongst the people which is who they're trying to reach anyway, and which is who would send them donations if they needed it, and so on and so forth. Look at how popular Tucker Carlson got amongst some people just for mentioning WTC 7. He proved my point that the people like the Noam Chomskys and the Glenn Greenwalds and the whoever's that would normally you would hope would do a good job should have, and they would have been so popular, and they never did it. They were afraid of losing their pulpits. They were afraid of losing their dollars, their whatever cash cows they could find. And it's a shame. But that moment you mentioned about Stephen Jones being on Tucker Carlson, I mentioned last time I was on the show that was a pivotal moment in the 9/11 truth movement, in that afterwards people felt that they had a responsibility to defend both Stephen Jones and the argument of controlled demolition after that happened. And I think that's when all of the focus just went towards the buildings at that point. And I wasn't the first to notice it. It was Jeff Wells, Rigorous Intuition. Is that his? Yeah, he wrote wrote an article called "The Real Thing" or "It's the Real Thing" that talked about the 9/11 truth movement 2 years prior to that, where we had the 9/11 omission hearings, the 9/11 People's Commission, the 9/11 congressional briefing, and none of those events mentioned the buildings at all.
That's true.
And
no, you're right. There was so much evidence. You didn't even need to talk about the buildings.
No. And do you remember people would say, I never lead with the buildings because it sounded crazy to a lot of people.
It wasn't even that. I mean, my conclusion after all this time is facts don't change a damn thing.
Well,
people don't listen to rational argument. We're emotional creatures, first of all. Second, if you're in group or where you get approval from your community isn't going to tolerate hearing about this, you're not going to sever the connections you have with the people in your life that you love or care about over this. I've met so many people in this journey who have done that and have wound up isolated and alone because of the path they've decided to take. People are going to think whatever they're going to. To me, it's about trying to reach the people who are actually curious and asking questions. That's the moment when they're reachable. The people who have an opinion on either side can't hear facts. Anyway,
Right.
there are just as many people within this movement who wanted to fight with me or who accused me of being CIA. Because, for example, the saying that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. And for anybody who wants to go see some footage that nobody's ever promoted in the truth movement, if you go to YouTube, there's a guy who contacted me named Lee Wheelbarger, Wheelbarger. He was and is, or was back then at least, he was a contractor for the government. He called me and was quite irate that we were saying, quote, the plane didn't hit the building. He's like, look at my videos on YouTube. Nobody ever sees these. And I went. He was right. It had 700 views in 8 years because no truthers wanted to see footage at the Pentagon that confirmed that what he was saying was true. There was
talking about the forensic video? Was that
No. This was a guy who was called in by the Pentagon that day to help go through the building. So you see him, you see them shoring up the walls that night. You see him going through, and he and his team of people helped pull out plane parts that night. And he's got it on video. And so he was, pretty ticked off that people were denying the reality that this guy and his team and other people there lived. And nobody wanted to look at the video evidence he had on YouTube.
I think the damage was done a long time ago, and the people that helped create that damage should really be ashamed of themselves. I mean, really, if you want to be an advocate for 9/11 justice, you have to have the ability to admit that you're wrong and move on from there. And you become a better activist if you can do that, which I've done many times because I'm not always right. But anyway,
Yeah, definitely got to stick with the stronger arguments, and there's a lot of garbage stuff that I see people repeat, and then there's all these bots. You know it's bot because you never get anywhere with the argument, and they get circular and they get right back to the same stuff, and then they start with somebody else, and it's just there to waste people's time and burn people out on these time-old discussions, and then lead you down the wrong paths. Because if they can get you arguing the wrong stuff, then that gets people's attention
if they
away
can get
from.
you asking the wrong questions, they never have to worry about the answers.
Yes,
Whatever
exactly.
that expression is.
So yeah, it's really crazy what they've done. Do you guys have websites? I know you have 911truth.org of Mike Berger.
Yep.
That's your website. Do you have any YouTube channel or anything?
There is a 911truth.org YouTube channel. I don't have a lot on it, but there is stuff on there.
Nice. I'll have to check that out. And
I
John
have-
Gold, you have an awesome YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's Gold9472 on YouTube, and my We Were Lied To About 911.com, which you can get my second book for free, which cost me thousands to make, and I gave it away for free. So please go take full advantage of that book. I also, when the families are doing something with regards to the Saudi lawsuit, be supportive of them. Let them know that there are people who still care. No, it's not God 9472. It's gold 9472.
It's all disinformation, John.
It is. Actually, it's funny. I'm not religious, but my name, Jonathan Michael Gold. Jonathan means a gift from God. Michael means in God's image. And if you take the L out of gold, what are you left with?
Wow.
That was a joke I used to make a long time ago.
And for the people in the chat, you're going to have to go to Will Barger's channel and go back 20 years. I don't have a link handy because that dude's had a 20-year video channel.
Instead of donating to the church, I would donate to John Gold. Month.
No, I don't send me any money. That's the one thing I've always done my best to do, is not make money off of the horrible tragedy that took place on September 11th, 2001.
But if you have any Marvel action figures or cards,
Exactly.
comic books and stuff, you could consider donating them to John. Loves that kind of stuff.
Those I will take.
Yes, so
you can see some of them hanging up on my wall here. Unopened inbox.
This is great. Yeah, this is great stuff. Anything you guys want to close with? We got like 5 minutes left.
Well, I've heard from two different family members that one is working on something. A very important family member said that they were working on something, and another very important 9/11 family member, with regard to the Saudi lawsuit, said that something's on the horizon or something's coming. So when that happens, just be supportive of them. Don't just support Matt Campbell and his lawsuit for WTC7. Support the thousands of 9/11 family members that are involved in the Saudi lawsuit as well. It's not rocket science. If you have a heart, if you have morals, you do the right thing and you be supportive of the families, which has always been a mainstay of the quote unquote 9/11 truth movement. That's all I pretty much have to say.
The only thing I've got to say is tell the people you love that you love them. Don't take a day for granted. Enjoy your life. Enlighten the fuck up, people.
Yes, you remember back in the 70s when we had shows like Dean Martin roasts or whatever the hell they were. People could laugh at themselves, and whatever happened to that?
They had MTV roasts, like those and stuff. So they brought it back a little bit, but then it became about like the dissing and
well, then there's roast battle.
That's all, yeah, battle raps and that's that kind of stuff too. There's a lot
Yeah,
of that still going on, but
but when you get into the really heavy dark shit, it's kind of hard to lighten up and remember like there's a life outside of this tunnel. Just
yeah, I mean, this is like
perspective, man.
something I've been doing for 20 years now,
Right.
so I'm beyond the darkness. I'm just like, all right, well, we got solutions too that we talk about, but it's important to educate people that, like, hey, the government's not just lying about UFOs or
Right.
just lying about this. They're lying about all of it, everything, all the time, all on all
Whatever
different.
they can, right? I mean, there's no advantage to them and us actually knowing what the hell they're
No.
doing.
None.
As a matter of fact, I don't know if you've ever heard of Muck Rock, but there's a website, Muck Rock. This week, they're teaching people how to do FOIAs.
That's
And
awesome.
they post
Ready
and
for
have
it.
a central repository for all the FOIAs that the people they
What's
teach.
the website?
Muck Rock. Muck Rock, I think it's .org. And they're doing like FOIA week, so they train you for free this week. You can sign up.
I gotta sign up for that because there's so much stuff that I need to FOIA and want to learn how to do that.
Yeah, and they're great. They do it for free. The other thing that's interesting, like this morning, I was just reading what they were posting about different FOIAs around the country and to things you would think, like FOIAing the Georgia Police Department over X, and the police department won't tell you the names of officers making arrests, like simple things that are supposed to be public records. So, like the scope of what is accessible to the average citizen is getting more and more restricted. And unless we work to shed light on this shit collectively, it's just going to get harder and harder. And one other thing is, I know that people who may be a little bit younger than the three of us, if you were born around or before 9/11, people think that because you have the internet, you have access to all the world's information. And let me tell you something, as the webmaster of 911truth.org, I could spend the rest, and I'm not exaggerating, I could spend the rest of my, no, Judy would. I could spend the rest of my life fixing links to sites that are dead and gone. I do this a lot, actually. But the point is, even if, like what I said about the story about Convar, I challenge some of you to try to dig something up on Convar. You've probably never seen articles on it, but I guarantee that even with me telling you they're a German company from the early 2000s or late 90s, you cannot find the stories on Convar anymore. They're gone.
One thing I brought up to Mike today is on my very own YouTube channel.
Yes.
If I do a search for a video on my own channel and know the exact title of a video, it still doesn't get returned in searches. Like I have to manually go find videos now on my YouTube channel. When did that happen?
Well, in the
Yeah,
same, well,
screwed the whole
because
algorithm up.
Google and YouTube and Bing, which control over 90% of search, have labeled us and disappeared us. I mean, 911truth.org used to crash every anniversary back in 05 and 06 because we couldn't have the bandwidth, because back in 04 and 03, 04, 05, in the very beginning, we were consistently one of the top 100 sites in the world. So let me repeat that.
Yeah, because
we were one of the top 100 sites in the world. And in 2007, just to bring this back to a point I made earlier about how things keep happening now that people are shocked, but we were there first. And I'm not saying this is a good thing, but in 2007, an academic used 911truth.org to demonstrate how Google was fucking with search. And they showed that we went from number 2 to like 1,000 in one day. And they documented it. So
that's awesome, because
you know what,
we were part of a team that used to make sure that the 9/11 truth videos were like #1 on Google video.
Google Video, yeah.
It used to be the #1 video on Google Video back in the day, and then like it used to all be 9/11 conspiracy stuff, and then they blacklisted all of it. Now you can't find it anywhere. It used to all be on the front page. It used to be the most viewed, most shared.
And it started then, like they would reset the counters. I remember there were videos that would get to 1 million, and then the next day you'd look and it'd be back at 0. And it's
When
like,
Obama was campaigning, he created a website called change.org, and people were writing in things that they wanted Obama to address. And one of the things was a new investigation into 9/11. And that turned out to be the very most popular thing on the website. And then they took it down.
yeah.
And
then another thing, there's another argument I've heard for 20 years, which is if we just get enough people, if you just get a certain percentage of the population,
Right,
so,
the critical mass, the snowball effect.
So I'm gonna shit on that idea now, because in 2006, when we were doing national surveys, we had more than half the country, folks, not 3% or 5 or 10.
right.
We had over half of the voting age American public. So we already had them, and we still couldn't get anywhere with them. The numbers, and I believe if we poll now, the numbers have actually gone backwards since then, unfortunately.
However, it is still a pivotal issue of our day. You know, we're where we are today in the world directly as a result of what we did, our response to 9/11. We are where we are today because of our response to 9/11.
Yes. The war is everything that's happened. So it all starts there. It all needs to go back there to fix it all. So
Very well.
thank you guys so much. We just hit 2 hours, so people get turned off and intimidated when they see videos longer than that. So we're gonna shut it down here, and we'll bring you guys back on again at some point.
Thanks for the late minute surprise invite. I really appreciate it. It's good seeing you.
Thanks for coming. It was nice meeting you. And sorry for
Jeremy.
the wrong introduction at the beginning.
It's great.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Have a great
Jeremy.
night, everyone. If you
too.
guys want to stick around, I'll we can hang out for a bit.
Sure.
All right.
Well, thanks.
Thanks, man.